All right, hi everyone. Today I am doing my follow up with Murcer from Mongolian Mindset. So, Murcer, we were just talking a bit about different typologies. We're just sort of going down a bit of a tangent with, was it OP
Yeah.
and some others? I think we're talking about different typologies. You're in the group where you've been using Enneagram
hmm
alongside Myers Briggs a bit and using Enneagram to sort of cover the gaps between why people don't necessarily identify with the Myers Briggs types.
hmm
Um, yeah, any other thoughts on that part?
Well, I think there first we started with Linda Barons, and
Yeah,
we got down to like understanding that system pretty well. I think what a lot of people do online is they try to tell people they can type people well,
mm.
and the honest God truth is it takes a lot of practice, and I'm
Yeah,
talking about a lot
oh
and a
yeah,
lot of practice.
oh
That
yeah,
you're gonna be wrong a lot. It's not just something you
yeah,
just like pick up and you're just like, yeah, this person, this, but like people online will convince you that like you can just pick this thing up and run and just type people. And majority of the time you're wrong.
yeah,
But like going into that, so we started there, and then um, we started typing like celebrities or whatnot to draw people
mm.
into our group, and we do like free typing sessions or whatnot. And then we got into Enneagram. We got into Enneagram just because we're just very good. We really want like self development,
Yeah.
and I'm not a big fan of like watching people on YouTube. So we went and actually peeled up like the books from like Stanford, like this one here. This is the first one we actually started. It's a very small book,
It's
essentially.
Enneagram. Yeah,
It's based off Stanford. And then we started getting into like more of like Beatrice Chestnut's material. And we have Rizzo as well. I don't know what that book is around here, but we have Rizzo as well. And what we notice is like a lot of like the stereotypical types. Like let's say for instance, myself being an 8 ENTJ, that's usually the ENTJ that everyone knows and can identify very
yeah,
easily. But let's say if you fall into like a more analytical ENTJ who's like a 5 or something, you might have a tougher time accepting your type. And the reason why is because you'll look at someone like myself. It's like I'm not as motivated as him. I'm not as power hungry as him. I'm not as on top of it things as him. I would rather take a more of an advisor role. As opposed to like leading and taking charge or always want to be the leader or always like for me, I always feel like I need to be the leader. Like if I'm not the leader, then I'll just fucking leave. Like generally speaking, that's how I do things in life.
yeah,
Um, and if I am sitting and like observing, I'm waiting till I can take that position. Like I'm acquiring information, and eventually I'm going to go out and do my own thing. Just this is how it goes. Um, but it explains that like we'll have INTJs in our group, and we have INTJs who are fives. Those are still stereotypical ones. They're analytical, and then you have the ones that are fours, and they're completely different.
yeah,
Um, and that is something we think a lot of like the typology spaces was missing. We think Enneagram's a little bit better when it comes to self development
yeah,
because it lays it out pretty self-explanatory of like where you need to develop as in like, and it gets into your childhood, like something you went wrong in your childhood and like the things that you are like hiding.
yeah,
For someone like myself, trading feelings for power, subdue my feelings for power. Like that's um, what makes me comfortable is not sharing my vulnerable side, pushing that away and being more into power. Like I don't like when people tell me, "Oh, how do you feel about something?" Like I don't want to talk about that. I just want to get the task done. I just want to move on. I don't
yeah,
care for it. Um, and when women tell you to be vulnerable or whatever, I don't really like that as well. The only time I can really get vulnerable is like if I've been drinking, and I hate
mm,
that like that side of myself. Like the next day when I wake up, I'm like, oh my god, that guy makes me want to throw up.
mm. That
But
makes sense. Makes sense.
yeah,
Um, there's something there about that. There's the assumption for Enneagram that everyone has had something go wrong in their childhood,
hmm
which always creates a trauma, then creates the Enneagram type.
Hmm.
But I guess does something always have to happen in someone's childhood that creates a trauma? I'm not. I'm skeptical of the premise.
So it's not as much as like something has to happen to create trauma. It's just like something in your life just a lot like will put you on a certain path. Like for
Mm,
five, they tend to like I forget exactly what it says, but like in their family household, they tend to want to be like an expert or something. So then they kind of go on that route to like being a five. That's weird.
hmm
Like a nine, is in a family where their voice really isn't heard as much,
mm,
and because their voices are heard, like over time they develop like, well, being like knowing what everybody else wants and not caring what they want. Um,
mm,
and but that's like kind of like living in a household where like let's say you may have a strong parent that doesn't allow you to have a voice or something. And
right.
over time that might do something to you. It's not like trauma, like it just to me, I just see it as like certain personality types you come in the world with, and those generally will have like a plethora of enneagrams that they can usually go like maybe one or two.
Yeah.
But people don't really notice that, but they end up taking that route, whether they see it or not. Um,
Can can Enneagram change?
I don't think it really does change. I think you may change like a wing or something, like a
Mm,
wing. Like let's say for myself, I might switch from my seven wing to a nine wing and be more of a mediator,
yeah.
um, as opposed to like um, being like going out and doing things. I may change into a more of a mediator role, want to help people. But I think that might happen with the course of life. But I still think innately you will still be an eight deep down in your core. But you do have different shifts in Enneagram. So like an eight has like when I'm secure, I can become a two, which is like a giver, shows more of a vulnerability, wants to help people and stuff. And when I'm stressed, then I take on more of a five mindset, which is the analytical side. And I've kind of
Yeah.
noticed that in
Yeah.
myself. Like when I'm deeply stressed with a situation, I'll tend to reserve and analyze it a lot,
Yeah.
and come up with like the solutions. Um, so I mean, you got all of that there. I don't think it really changes much, really, man. I really don't.
Right. Okay. Because that's the thing. There's the movement between the numbers,
Hmm.
which I think rhymes quite nicely with socionics.
Hmm.
Like, for instance, socionics would have, take say an ILI, they should be going between five and four-ish tendencies.
Hmm.
And that's sort of to be expected.
Yeah.
You take an LIE, I think as we discussed before, they should be going between five-ishness and eight-ishness.
Hmm.
Like that is should be that spot where they sit because they should be analytical when they're under pressure and they start speculating what other possibilities there are to do
Hmm.
when it and when they're confident, that's when they really try themselves in terms of taking very decisive action
Hmm.
and not just speculating. Whereas an ILI doesn't quite step out of that. They are more stuck, not necessarily in speculation, but in terms of thinking about where things are going and needing it to be entirely lined up before they take any kind of action at all.
Yeah.
Uh, so
They're
yeah,
they're very paralysis analysis. Is what I would say. They really struggle with action or
yeah,
taking action. Only secure do they because a five becomes an eight when they're secured. So when they've secured their, I guess their plan, they'll know
yeah,
they'll move. So that
yeah,
explains a lot.
yeah. It's the thing. ILIs need to think that they've thought it all out, and then they'll be able to take action. Um, Without that, yeah, they don't end up acting. They end up really keeping their cards close to their chest and
Mhm.
being quite cautious. Um,
I got a question for you, man.
yeah.
How did you how did you what was your path to socionics? How did you get into this? How did you
So I started with Myers Briggs. I was introduced to Myers Briggs around 15 or 16 years old at school.
Mhm.
I took the MBTI. I got ENTP in there. I later discovered Socionics online.
Mm-hmm.
I got into talking about it on the personalitynation.com forum, which no longer is around.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I kind of really got into it. When I was at university, I was sort of trying to work out correlations between Myers-Briggs and Socionics types. And eventually, as I got deeper into Socionics, I realized you just don't really need Myers-Briggs anymore. And that's kind of how it developed. Yeah, that's really it. So, exposure online and thinking about it more for myself, acquiring various mentors and friends throughout my time exploring it, and learning as much as I could, and then eventually starting to type people
Mm-hmm.
professionally, which I've been doing for several years now.
You've been doing it several years now.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can't. No one start as you said. I think before we went live, you can't type. Learning how to type people well takes a lot of experience.
It
A
does.
lot of experience. And one of the key reasons for that is that different types respond differently to the method that you're using. I was typing a friend of my wife's just earlier, and a classic example where I had a feeling, I had an intuition she was an SEE, but I couldn't really have any arguments to back it up. So I wanted to interview her to find out,
Mm-hmm.
right? After around 40, 50 minutes, we were going nowhere. It was going all over the place. And she was contradicting herself left, right, and centre. I couldn't get a clear picture of her from what she was telling me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realised, yeah, that's because she's an SEE. Because that's what SEs do. They contradict themselves. They
Mm-hmm.
can't actually assess themselves and put themselves in the box for you to analyse.
And
So they throw out contradictory information. They'll say they do this, but actually do that. You tell an SCE they're an extrovert, they say, "Oh, actually, I always thought I was an introvert." They always sort of say these things. It's completely disconnected from what they actually do
mm-hmm.
because they can't they can't look across the whole range of behaviors they've engaged in and say this aspect is the signal and this is all the noise. They just see it all as noise, and so they can't really give you a clear reading on themselves.
Wait, can I ask you? Is that type Myers Briggs ESTP?
It's not. There's no perfect correlation.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't. I give them in their ESFP, but it's a Socionics ESFP, which is not the cuddly Myers Briggs ESFP. It's the type of Genghis Khan
Mm-hmm.
and Julius Caesar, who you might end up typing as ENTJs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a more sort of tactical and less analytical version of an LIE, really.
Mm.
More political, more sort of one-to-one personal connection oriented.
But don't they have like TI polar? And
Yeah,
how would you
that's
explain
exactly it. That's exactly what the problem is.
how would you explain that?
How do I explain that for in
The
what
TI
context?
polar, like what's your definition of TI
Ah,
polar?
okay. So introverted logic is about the if let's say you have lots of data points, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now TI is when you're actually drawing a constellation out of the data points. Some of the stars don't fit into the constellation. These stars do. And now you make sense of it. You now got a picture based on drawing a line through certain constellations, certain stars to basically draw it up and make a bit clear picture.
Mm-hmm.
So it basically involves a simplification of the data. It's digitizing the data. So that now there's signals. Now there's something that's clear. This now explains what it's about. Without that, you've got data points. In this situation, we did this research and it turned up these facts. In that
Mm-hmm.
situation, we did this research and it turned up those facts. So the TI is the theory. In all cases, X goes to Y. Now, maybe it doesn't always go to Y. Maybe there's an experiment which shows actually the opposite. If you're TI oriented, you're more likely to discount that as being an anomaly rather than being something which disproves the theory. Because if you're someone who's TE oriented, you're going to be far more likely to base your conclusions on the data and think far more pragmatically in terms of what works in each situation. So you may be less likely to draw a general rule or theory from that. When it comes to an SEE, they are just almost incapable of drawing any kind of general rule or theory on anything. They just don't see general rules and theories, and that's partly their TI vulnerable function. They don't see the constellations. They just see each instance as a separate cluster of facts.
Hmm. So they more so just draw generalizations. They don't ever go deeper into anything.
Yeah, they aren't likely to draw any kind of general rule or principle out of anything. They're almost very much in the moment. How do I apply this here and now? Um, if They get quite frustrated with theory for that reason. They want to know, how can I put it into practice? What can I get out of this? How can I use this right now? Yeah, they're very practical types.
Yeah, because I've noticed with my cousin, I type in ESFP,
Mm.
and if someone like is hitting him with like logical things, he can't break it down. Like as like this one point where this guy owed him money, and the guy was trying to show him like where the money went. It
Yeah,
was like, let's say like he was going to an event or something, and he kind of
yeah,
like had a group or something, and my cousin didn't get all of his money,
yeah,
and the guy was basically like, "Yo, this is what happened." And my cousin couldn't break it down for him. Like he couldn't understand it. So I had to break it down for him, like separately, like, yo, this is what happened. You had 17 people. You initially thought you had 10, but you had 17. So therefore, the actual money that you got was actually less because you didn't calculate beforehand that you had 17 people. You did the math of 10 people. And like I had to actually break it down to him. Like he couldn't like he just thought like the money should have been the same. But I'm like, you ended up charging people differently, based off the fact that you thought 10 people were going to show up, but 17 people showed up. Now you divide that money by 17 people, you're not going to get all your money, and that's what happened. And he's like,
mm.
"Oh, I didn't notice that." I'm like, "Yeah, bro. Like,
Mm.
pretty simple for me to see, but for him, it was like he just couldn't he couldn't like understand that."
Well, I'd say SEs can they can be quite commercially oriented, and they can see, if you do this, that leads to that. But they can do that. They have the pragmatic thinking. They can see what works, and they can test things out to see what doesn't work.
Hmm.
That's not really. It's when it's in the purely theoretical area, then it suddenly becomes very, very difficult for them. If you watch, say, Amy, do you know Amy Yamanaka?
Who's that?
Amy Y. She's an ESFP. Used to think she was a 90J,
Hmm.
which is a classic sort of thing which happens on YouTube. Now, when she explains things, you think, okay, what was she saying? Is she saying this? Is she saying this? Is she saying this? I'm not quite sure what exactly she's saying when she explains something. That is the problem with SEs. Their ideas and concepts of things sort of bleed into each other, so that you eventually realize they're not actually saying something which is logically distinct. The
Hmm.
concepts don't actually stand out as being coherently stuck to concepts. But if you are to show them, oh no, see, if you do this, that's not going to work because of this X, Y, Z. They'll gel that thinking very quickly. Oh yeah, no, they'll be fine with that kind of thinking. It's
Hmm.
pragmatic. There's a point, right? You charge too much because you had in your mind that only 70, but that 10 people were going to come. Actually,
Hmm.
17 people came.
Hmm.
So you can see how that led to that result, because you did this, that led to that. They're fine with that. That's
Yeah,
fine.
he couldn't grasp that for nothing. I'm telling you, like I'm like,
Yeah.
yo.
I mean, okay, Mark Cuban, right?
Hmm.
Mark Cuban is an example of a highly intelligent, highly commercial SEE. Um, he'd be fine with that kind of argument you made.
Hmm.
It's but if you were to start talking about the nature of, say, um, introverted sensation, and what exactly that means and what that looks like, and identifying this is introverted sensation and that is not introverted sensation because of these rules and how it all fits together.
Mm. That's what you're saying.
SEs, it'll be like sand through their fingers.
So it's like
Um,
applying principles. Like they can't really apply principles across a system. Is that
yes,
what you're saying?
exactly. They can't take the principles and actually apply them. And I've known SEEs who have just sort of jumped from one type to another, to another, to another. They don't really have a sense of what, out of the things they're doing, actually in the big picture corresponds to this sort of type structure. They get too lost in certain anomalous facts that don't quite fit with that, and so they can't really see how still the structure is maintained if there even is a structure. But that's what I've seen from SEEs. They also tend to just be naturally very ultra pragmatic. I mean, an LIE is pragmatic as well, but an SEE is pragmatic to the point where they cannot see anything other than simply how things are working. They can't see how this actually goes against a certain principle or a certain rule or way of thinking, but now it's no longer kept consistently. So therefore it's broken. An SC will be like, well, no, I'll just fix it here and I'll just make that work and I'll just make this work. And I'll combine this thing and that thing together and it works. So it's absolutely fine. They don't see how suddenly it's a contradictory mishmash.
I see you said. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
The reason why I asked is because there's a lot of people don't really go too in depth with the shadow functions as well.
Yeah.
You know, like you'll see some people that say what they call TI trickster is not being able to apply any type of logical thinking. That's what
Yeah. But no, but I think that's wrong. Every type
I
can apply logical thinking.
think that's wrong. I think what you're saying is right, and
Yeah.
you'll see that with ENFPs and ENFPs for sure. We have a lot of them in our group, and what I've noticed about them is that over time their logic breaks down. Like that's what I've noticed. The number one thing about them is like they'll come out with a very good argument, but
Yeah.
like by the sixth or seventh comment, their logic is broken down. Like it's like broken down, and it's like, what are you doing here? Like it's not consistent at all. By like the fifth or sixth post, like a comment or something, it'll just like break down. They'll start very good with a very good argument,
Yeah.
but then as it goes apart, you can just see that there's pretty bad logic here and that they can't apply it.
Yeah. I think it's the contradictions. They're not aware of the contradictions. So if you catch one out in an interview, they will say they do one thing, and then they'll say they do the exact opposite of that one thing, and they'll describe themselves as being very much of both. Oh, I'm someone who likes to take on challenges. I like to I don't shy away from any sort of intense environment. I'm going to go out and I'm going to take that on. I'm going to do it. And the next minute they're saying, oh, but I'm actually I like things to be comfortable. I like to I won't want my environment to be too intense. Yada yada. They're literally the next minute they're contradicting exactly what they were saying before in that same conversation,
Mhm.
and they don't realize that they're doing it. The reason they don't realize that they're doing it is that almost the meanings of the words that they're using is sort of is not consistent in their heads. So they in terms of what they're actually saying, they'll contradict themselves. In their heads, they think they're describing it as who they are, but really either they're picking out certain instances themselves, not thinking, hang on, that instance of me does not correlate with the other stuff I presented on myself. Or they'll think, right, well, this word in this context actually means this, but actually it doesn't mean that, and that's not really the word we use to describe that particular concept. So you described yourself wrongly. So that is the problem which they seem to be facing from interviewing them. So they're
So
not even aware.
So for us, it's pretty easy to find them because they're informative, right? They're very informative people, and they're
Yeah.
initiating. So it's very easy for us to figure them out because they're informative and they're initiating. And then they're an SE user, and they're like the only SE user of the informative initiating types. So
Mm,
when you get those mechanics, it's like boom, ESFP, and it's gone. Like it's
right.
move on. I like they're pretty easy for us to find because of those metrics.
So
But
the informative makes sense because they lean towards being factual people.
mhm.
They lean towards having data and experience of how things work, which they can actually share, which can be quite helpful. Um, they're almost quite driven to show their competence,
Yes.
actually knowing things and actually being able to show that. The Yeah, so that makes sense. They'd be informative. Yeah, trying to think. Is there anything about the LIE typing that Doesn't make sense? Does it all make sense? Have you had any thoughts about it?
Um, I mean, I pretty much already knew my type. But I mean, the only thing that I um would like to know is like how does one use socionics? Like, let's say,
Mm.
how do for us it would be, I guess, LIE. How do I use NE? How
Mm.
does the system apply?
Yeah.
Extroverted intuition there.
So every type has what I call the growth transition. So this is very Enneagrammy, you could say. The
Hmm.
growth transition ties together the eighth function slot, which is the demonstrator function, which is NE for an ENTJ, and the sixth function slot in socionics, which would be a bit like the tertiary, right? The SE for an ENTJ.
All right, wait. So you got to slow down because
Yeah,
you're saying the eighth slot for socionics is NE,
yeah,
okay, and you're saying the sixth is the child function, would be
SE.
SE. Because in
Yeah,
our system, we have the third and the
yep,
sixth would be those two functions.
yeah.
So I'm wondering how you guys go.
Well, because it's slotted in a bit differently. You've
Hmm.
got 1, 2, 3, and 4 are what are called officially called the mental functions. I call them the public functions. So that's the ones which consist of, if you are a dynamic type, right, which you are because you got NI and TE, so introverted perception and extroverted judgment, right? That's shared for all the top four, right? Introverted perception and extroverted judgment. Or it's flipped around. For me, it's extroverted perception and introverted judgment. So those top four, they're what's known as public functions. The idea is that those are the functions which are to do with your interactions with the outside world. So an ENTJ will be mindful towards the pragmatic strategy.
Hmm.
How are things working in the long run? Where's it all? What's it going? What's actually relevant? What's useful, significant to my goals? Right. But they also know that there's this sort of bugbear, which is, the expectation of them to be sort of pleasant and wholesome in the day to day and their interactions with people and keeping people happy, not rubbing people up the wrong way. Those two elements, what they bring to the world and also what the world kind of expects of them, forms the public. So it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Meanwhile, you've got the privates. And the private area, this is the stuff which you're doing, either you're just doing in the background because you don't particularly care about it, but you're quite good at it. That's like NE and TI. That's 7 and 8. Or it's 5 and 6, which is the stuff which you actually really need, but you don't know how to really provide that much for yourself, or you're going to grow in and develop in over time. So that's going to be FI and SE for the ENTJ. So public and private is all how it's divided up. But then you've got the strongest up at the top and right at the bottom. You've got the weaker ones in the middle. And then you've got the top one's valued. The next one's not valued. The next one is suddenly valued again. And the last one's not valued. So that's why it's divided up that way. So when you get to an ENTJ, you will be looking at it is entirely in the private zone because it's about growth. Growth is a private thing, it's not a public thing. It's about what you're doing for yourself to develop yourself. So it is the growth transition takes you from something which you're strong at but you don't value. In other words, something which is low stakes because you're good at it. There's very little risk in the area, but
Hmm.
also low reward because you don't actually care about it that much, right? There's nothing really, you're going to not much satisfaction you're getting out of it, and you can do it very well as low stakes. But as you grow in confidence, you should move from low stakes, low reward to high stakes, high reward.
Hmm.
High stakes, high reward. High stakes because it's an area of weakness. You could fail. It could go wrong, right? No, it
Hmm.
can go wrong. But if it doesn't go wrong, it goes well, there's high reward. It's worth the risk. That's because you value it. So that is a movement from what we call the id block, which is what's strong but not valued in private, to a place which is weak but valued in private. And specifically, out of those, it's the two functions which I call obvious as opposed to subtle. The ones which are having energy, high amount of energy put through them. So these are the extroverted ones if you're an extrovert. So that will be in the id block, NE, and in the super id block, which is weak but valued, where you grow, SE. And these are natural opposites. The more NE there is, the less SE there is, and vice versa. We know that we can put that to a test immediately. The more you look at the thing immediately in front of you, naturally that means the less you'll be looking around that thing and all the alternatives other than that thing. That's just physics. That's just how reality works. In the same way, the more direct you are, the less indirect you are. This is why SE and NE are natural opposites. I mean, truly opposites. They cannot occupy the same space at the same time. So as you move out of NE, which is your low stakes, low reward, you're moving towards SE, which is high stakes, high reward. That is the growth transition. And what that looks like is that an ENTJ, when they're not confident in their position, they'll grow towards they'll deteriorate to speculation. Because speculation comes naturally. Casting a broad net of interests and giving things a chance is very natural and easy for them to do, but they feel as if they're giving too many chances and things aren't actually necessarily relevant in this, and they really want to be moving forward with their goals, and they get impatient about this. So once they have any confidence in what they're doing, they'll stop doing this and then start just going and acting and impacting and having those concrete, real achievements to add to this. Yeah, I've done this, done this, done this, done this. That's what they want. They want their boxes ticked off on their big list. So yeah, but as they grow in confidence, they'll become more and more almost impatient and restless to act, and they'll do it. And suddenly they find they've acted, and suddenly they find themselves in a situation suddenly they don't know what to do immediately. They'll go back to that stuff. Oh my goodness, and they start hesitating and doubting, and they'll be in that speculative space again.
It does happen. I've kind of noticed that with myself. If I'm confident about something, I'm ready to act, and then when I'm not, then I'm like, oh, it's kind of like some people would, and I've kind of had this thing in our group. We would call it SE inferior type thing. A lot of groups would call it SE inferior. But like, when I'm not confident, it's almost like a SE inferior type thing hits me, and it's like, oh, got it.
Yeah.
But when I'm confident, I feel like I can do anything, And as soon as something shakes me up, then I'm back to that, overanalyzing everything, running it. Okay, I got what I need, and then I'm back out again. But if I get shook again, it's all over again,
Yeah, exactly. Now with we call you INTP, but you could call it INTJ, right? That type, their SE inferior, a suggestive function, it feels a bit different. Rather than sort of a rapid switching between restless impatience and sort of sudden self-doubt, they're more consistently in the doubting, caution, thinking things through, taking their time to really make sure it all sort of lines up before they do any kind of action. But in that, it's a bit less frenetic. It's a bit more lethargic, you could say. They sit in that space for longer. They also don't do so much speculation. It's more, unlike an ENTJ, which casts quite a broad net, they tend to focus in on certain areas of expertise, and they kind of know what the direction is very clearly, but they spend a lot of time knowing what things are, but sort of waiting for the moment before they can actually start acting towards it. Sometimes, I've interviewed a few allies like this. They knew what the right direction was, and they missed it, and now they're like, that was the right direction, but I'm never going to get in the right direction anymore. I'm now just going to have to make do with this path instead. And it's like they're depressed about it. They have none of the sort of energy to really shift themselves back onto the right path. So they're sort of stuck. But yeah, that can happen a lot with these sorts of types. ENTJs don't get stuck, like not for very long, only when they're sort of caught out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you, like I always tell people, if you catch me outside my comfort zone, you got me. But
Mm-hmm.
usually, if not, then I got you. And I've already strategized this. I've already seen it. It's kind of like chess for me. Like I play a lot of chess.
Yeah.
Um, so like once you played a lot of chess, you know your openings, you know how to defend all your openings. People can't really catch you, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But the second that they do get you outside of your strategy, I always tell people they got me. Like if you get me outside of my strategy, you got me.
Yeah.
But that's why you study a lot more. Like for say like chess, you study several different openings, just in case you get set in this position or that position, and you follow back to the principles to things. You know, um, I don't know if you play chess or anything.
I used to play a little bit. I've never got that good because I never practiced enough.
Yeah,
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice.
yeah, it does. It takes a lot of practice. It's a
I've
lot.
got there's a question or sort of a request from my friend Michael.
Hmm.
Michael does this system that that basically gauges how people work with different emotions,
Hmm.
and it's and the idea is that different people prefer maybe three emotions in a certain hierarchy, and those are sort of deeply connected to early childhood memories. So he wants to know what your earliest two memories are.
Earliest
Do you
two.
mind answering that request?
Yeah, sure. Earliest two memories. God, I think about this. Man, this is um earliest two memories I could think of. One would be the time me and my brother was fighting inside of this fire, and he pushed me, and I got a nasty burn on my leg.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was kind of, I think that was like maybe when I was 4 or maybe 5. I'm
Yep.
not sure. Another one would be um, learning how to ride a bike by using unconventional methods to learn how to ride a bike because I couldn't ride it the normal way. So I
Yep.
had to figure out a method to actually learn how to ride a bike. And I would like ride till the bike would start leaning, and then
Yep.
like kick off the wall, and then ride a little bit more. And then I just got used to being able to like function on the bike itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but those are probably my earliest memories.
It's interesting because that suggests you were probably quite old, like maybe even 7 or
No, I was like 5.
3. You're 5.
Like,
Okay, 5. Okay, fair enough. So yeah, I'd be interested to know from Michael if that sounds like one of the more red sorts of emotions. Can't remember the name. There's one that's in red, which is sort of a more sort of aggressive, or like, yeah, I am formidable. I got this. That kind. It's very 80. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know from Michael which what emotion that pans onto. Um, okay. Any other questions about ENTJ or socionics in general?
uh, hmm. Like what do you recommend for growth for um ENTJ Socionics? Where can I find more information? Like what
Mm.
sources would you recommend
Well,
besides yourself?
okay. What I would say is this: you are someone who's already taken big steps towards extroverted sensation growth, right? You've already gone put a lot of hard work there.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I will say is about what could come next,
Hmm.
because, and I've been thinking about this in the last year or so about spiraling. When I mean spiraling, I mean that although you could see it in terms of a simple linear growth from NE to SE,
Hmm.
but when you're using NE, you are going to be far less insufferable to other people. Whereas when you use SE, you may become insufferable to other people. And in general, the mobilizing function, when attempted by someone who hasn't developed more maturity around it, becomes insufferable.
Hmm.
So an ENTJ being insufferable, what does it look like? Pushing their weight around, putting on almost a bit pathetic displays to try to show their dominance in that situation. Very good example, Quentin Tarantino in the "I'm shutting your butt down" interview.
Hmm.
Um, so it was not really appropriate to the situation. He just sort of flipped out on this interviewer. That can happen with ENTJs. Now, the point is that one would expect to see each type develop their mobilizing, so lean into their mobilizing more, and then get burnt, and then fall back on their demonstrative again. Now, after a while, they come back out of a demonstrative, they build up their confidence again, and try again at the mobilizing. Then they'll probably get burnt again and fall back onto their demonstrative. So I guess the key point is this: there may become a time when you next get burnt in your mobilizing function and you'll fall back onto your demonstrative function again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what the reason this often happens is that as you go through your growth transition, a simultaneous interaction is occurring. This interaction I call the hubris interaction. So growth transition triggers the hubris interaction. What is that? So it's an interaction rather than transition. That means it is a relationship between one function and its inverse, not its opposite. Transitions are opposites. NE to SE, these are opposites. But the inverse of SE is going to be SI.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially what happens with a hubris interaction is that you've grown towards SE. SE is now in activation. SI is looming under the surface, not being paid attention to as you're going full steam ahead in your SE. That
Mm-hmm.
means at some point the wax of your wings will melt because the SI is not being paid attention to. That's the hubris, right? And that's when you'll fall crashing into the sea again. And that happens to almost anyone, I'd say, as they develop their mobilizing function. There's almost a time limit when that's up, you'll crash.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, as you crash, as you go through that sort of death of confidence, that's what you need to then have the chance of rebirth again with improved confidence. So that your next failure may be on its way at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what you're saying here is what I'm taking from it is with SE, I'm mobilizing, but at the same time, you got to pretty much watch SI, which would be like your physical health, or is what I
Which
would
is
see it as.
hard. And it's
Uh,
hard because you don't see your own SI.
no.
This is where having people around you who are clued into SI can help. And the idea is not about them telling you, oh, this SI matter is not going to be important to you. It strikes you as completely unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, you need to be keeping what you're doing sustainable. And you need quite hard rules for how to make sure you're getting in rest time, you're getting in downtime. And the idea is that is conducive to you achieving your goals. It's not just a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard for an ENTJ to come to terms with the idea of almost switching off. They almost can't switch off mentally, but at least they can get more sleep into their schedule. Maybe they can put together some time to actually practice meditation. That could be quite useful for an ENTJ to learn to practice meditation, because that almost forces them to engage in actually switching off a bit, or at least focusing their attention on one thing. It just makes them a bit more mindful, a bit more present. It's it's the sort of thing where you need enough attention to this area so that you don't suddenly burst a gasket and everything falls apart and you need to recover from your injury. I've known ENTJs to go on holiday and come back injured and actually more tired from their holiday than as they set off, because they just threw themselves into mountaineering and all sorts of other extreme activities when actually they're meant to be having a break. But ENTJs don't really know how to have a break. Sometimes I ask the ENTJ, how do you relax? Oh, I put on a podcast and I listen to this intellectually stimulating material. Oh, I relax by going for a run. I relax by riding a motorbike at high speed. These sorts of things. That's not relaxing. You're not switching off. You're actually stimulating yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We know this because if any of those things were to be, if you were to put a baby through any of these, the baby won't sleep. The baby will be very much awake. So that's not relaxing, that is stimulating. So yeah, ENTJs don't really understand relaxation, and that's fine. You don't need to understand relaxation, except if you want to be performing at your very best for as long as possible.
Hmm.
Then you need your relaxation.
Yeah.
Same way a Venus flytrap, right? If a Venus flytrap isn't allowed to go dormant, it will die, right? It will
Mhm.
die. You want it to be catching flies and having its traps. You can't do it all the year. You can try. It will die a lot earlier than if you just let it go dormant for half a year.
Mhm.
Same idea.
So it's kind of like the knowledge I'm seeing here is practically like a candle. The hotter you burn that candle, the quicker it burns out. So like you'll get like health problems.
Mm.
Like I said, there's been a time where I was going, and then I ended up having to be wheelchaired into a hospital from working out too much, going out
Yep.
with friends,
Classic.
like whatever. I got a nice 3-day stay at a hospital. So now I've come up with a system that if I even feel as though like my body's off, I just take the day off. Or like I always stay with like electrolyte type things like Pedialyte. I don't know. I buy
Yeah.
those in the bulks of 100 just in case. Like if my body even feels off, I drink one of those immediately. Uh,
Right.
like I
Right.
always keep those like on like at any time because I know I do have a tendency to just go, and if one of my eyes start blinking too much or something, or like I'm like okay, that's a sign that like my electrolytes are off, or like I need a Pedialyte, or
Yeah.
my body starts getting shaky. Then I'm
Yeah.
like oh shit, okay, I need a Pedialyte. Like I
Yeah.
don't even notice eating like until like my
Yep.
body just gets like to a point where it's like, oh man, if I don't eat now, it's gonna crash on me.
Yep.
Um,
That makes sense. I mean, one thing I will say, that methodology is going to crowd you out with false positives. So that's at the point, right? I was talking about the SCE in their blind spot, which is their TI.
mhm,
SI would be your blind spot. So your ability to tell when things are actually going out of whack is actually very, very bad. So yeah, you think you've perceived something, and then you take some electrolytes.
mhm.
You then later on that day, you feel as if you've perceived something again. You'll take more electrolytes. Eventually, you'll take on too many. There must be an upper limit for how much electrolytes you can have, or whatever else you do, and that's going to be you see what I mean?
Mhm.
So this is where I think it's important to be able to lean in to other people to be able to pick that up. Like my wife can tell when I'm tired. My wife can tell when I'm slightly off.
Mhm.
That's very helpful for me. Sometimes I have to be reminded that I'm cold or I'm hungry or I'm hot. So for LIE, it's perhaps even worse. So yeah, you can use your methodology. I'm not saying it's doomed, but it does seem to be likely to turn up lots of false positives, and those false positives themselves can become problematic.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I'm always scared though. I'm always like, hey,
Oh yeah.
it's better than the alternative. Like,
Mm.
if I do miss it, then I could be back at the hospital.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's
oh
like,
no, no, quite right, quite right. No, I can see why you've taken that course of action. I'm not
mm,
saying it's the wrong thing to do, but yeah, if you have someone who can sort of tell you when it's not a false positive,
mhm.
then that's also yeah, that could be very very helpful.
Yeah, I have I've always had like I guess you guys would call it INFJ, but I call it INFP,
Mhm.
best friend, and she's always like worried. Like she's always worried. She's like, oh, I'm worried about like because she's always worried about
Yeah.
like because I just go like I say, I just go, and she's like, oh, I'm worried about you, like and then as soon as she says she's worried about some shit happens to me. I swear to God, every time whenever she says it's like something
Yeah.
happens. I don't know what the fuck it is.
No.
It's like whenever she says it, I'm like, oh, something's about to happen, and it always does happen. Um, like I'll get
Mm.
like sick or something or something. Um, but I don't know, man. It's tough because going makes me feel alive. Like just going and doing and getting out there just makes me feel alive.
Yeah.
Just at a point, you burn out. It's like,
Yep.
but the crazy thing about that is even when I burn out, I only need a little bit of time and then I'm back out doing it again.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Like it's almost like I never learned.
Mm. No, it makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, I think people like who are incredibly busy all the time, like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they've all got like meditation coaches or something like that. They have something in their life which is like hard rules for them to stick to just to keep things together.
Mm-hmm.
And they've consulted outside of themselves to be able to get that thing sorted. Um, but yeah, no, it sounds like you've been thinking about it and you've got a plan in place, which is the important thing. You're aware of that problem when that could become an issue.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Anything else?
Nah, man, that's pretty much it, man. Thank you for having me on, Jack.
Do
We'll
you
definitely
do you do you want to answer some more questions from the audience in the
go
time we
for
have left?
it. Yeah, let's go for it.
Let's take a look. So, Michael is asking, are you an organized person? Do you like planning ahead?
Yes, I am very organized person, and I do love planning ahead. If I don't plan ahead, it kind of freaks me out, makes me very uncomfortable. If I don't have a plan ahead or something, it makes me very uncomfortable. If I have a plan ahead, it's kind of as though I feel more confident, and when I'm feeling confident, I'm at my best. So I'm always going to plan ahead, just because it just makes me just feel more confident in myself as a person.
Mhm.
Um, it's-
Makes sense.
I guess
Um,
I guess you would say that's more of a speculation, whatever. So I'll speculate before and then I'll move, but that's why I plan ahead always.
yeah, that's also your creative function, introverted intuition. It's definitely going to be there, quite present in almost all your activities. And even when you're speculating, it's serving your introverted intuition. So the speculation is to then funnel those new insights through that more predictive, where are things going in the long run, focus and intuition. So yeah, that fits nicely. Um, Only Rexatory Morningstar is asking, if you were to have children, what types would you fear having as teenagers and why?
So for you guys, it would be the INFJ. I
Mhm.
fear having that, because one, I have this idea of legacy, or like I want to be able to train them to be like a micro version of myself.
Mhm.
And with an INFJ, y'all version INFJ, I don't think I could do that. I'd have to be more in touch with my own feelings and stuff. Uh, that would be very tough for me. I think that would be a very tough uh, child to raise for me. I think it would be the toughest, um, because I can't really push them in sports. Can't really push them to this. It's kind of like you gotta just accept them
Yeah,
for who they are. And that's tough. That'd be a lot tougher. Um,
makes sense. Another one from Only Rexatory Morningstar. How do you handle your first fight with your adult daughter for going against something you value?
how would I handle it?
Mm.
That's tough because I feel like you can't really do much with your daughter, because of the fact that you don't want to push her in a different direction
Mm.
that could cause her problems in the long term.
Mhm.
Um, but you also have to be stern. So that's a very, very tough question there. Like if it was a guy, if it was a son, I could be a lot more harsh with it. With a daughter, you got to kind of understand where she's coming from and try to give her advice, um, the best advice, and kind of talk about why, like what she's doing goes against what you value. So with women, it comes a lot more understanding.
Yeah.
As a son, I could just rough them up.
um, Here's one from Spacey. Do you consider yourself ideological, or do you stick to any ideologies?
That so I'm more open to. I would probably say ideological. But it's slowly. Like I'm slowly getting into more. At first, I would say when I was younger, I stuck to certain ideologies, but as I've gotten older, I'm going into more of them. You know, like I'm more inviting different type of things into my life, and combining them. When I was younger, it was like a couple things, and if you didn't agree with that, it was just we weren't gonna have a good time.
What were those things?
Uh, Back then, it was more of a like religious type stuff, uh,
Mm.
success type stuff, that type of thing. Like it was very hard for me to see other people's perspectives.
Mm.
Um, but as I've gotten older, I'm like, okay, this person, what they're saying is valid because of X, or like just just I'm a lot more open and understanding as a person as I've aged. But
Yeah.
when I was younger, it was just like one way for everything. And if
Mhm.
you weren't doing that way, then I'd probably say you were brainless or something. Um, yeah,
I see. So you see, quite quickly think someone was stupid because they weren't thinking about success in the way that you think about
yeah,
success.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, Michael wants to know if there's any other. Is it if there's one more early memory? That's what he wants.
Okay, one more early memory. Let's go. Let's go. Okay, it has to be back there. Um, hmm. Now that you say that, the earliest memory, let's say,
Yeah.
maybe pee in the bed. I mean, that's probably the earliest I can go. Pee in the bed, and trying to hide it. Probably the
That's a classic, isn't it?
yeah, pee in the bed and trying to hide it.
Mm.
It's probably the earliest I can, or a bit more vivid memory was um, when I was a kid. We were into foster care.
Yep.
So, and my mom would visit, and then she would leave, and I would kind of like run after her,
Mhm.
chase after her, but she couldn't. You know, she wasn't deemed by the state accepted to have us yet. So I remember that memory.
Mm. Okay. Thank you, Michael. Any thoughts of that one? Be interested to see. Um. Okay. I think that's all the questions. Um. Yeah, Mercer, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on again. Oh, hang on. What's that Michael saying? What about that memory? What about that memory? Do you mean the foster care one?
The foster care one. I just remember just that was I don't know, just I feel like that was just a part of myself that like I wanted my mom, so I didn't want to see her leave, you know. Um just I don't know, maybe it's just deep down who I am, deep down inside. What was my solution?
Mm.
Man, I just ran after the car. My mom still remembers this to this day. She talks about it. She said that was like one of the things that made her get clean off drugs
Mm.
was seeing me run after the car, you know, and knowing that like she couldn't have us, you know. So that was my solution. I ran after the car. I don't even know why. It was kind of like this outside entity pulled me to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing that had the effect that it did, and that's a good thing. Um, any specific thoughts in that memory?
Mm, I can say being powerless. Um, Being powerless, probably the thoughts that I would have in the memory. Not
Mm.
being able to have control over anything. Um,
Yeah, like your fate's no longer in your hands. You're sort of sent as foster parent, like you're in the hands of other people. You have no idea what's going to happen now. You don't know these people necessarily. You can't necessarily trust these people yet. You don't know. It's just goodness, and I can see where that generates strong feelings of powerlessness.
yeah, I just remember just not being able to have power. You know, you should
Mm.
be able to have power over things that you want in life,
Mm.
um, and you know, you're not able to have that. So basically, you're too weak.
Mhm. So yeah, Michael says that's a deconstruction theme. It's correlated to sadness, which is okay. All right. So
Deconstruction.
Yeah, Michael thinks that the the emotion of wanting to deconstruct things and take things apart into their different bits and pieces, very analytical, is connected to the emotion of sadness, and that kind of yeah, that's how he analyzes it.
Where can I read up more on that type of stuff?
Oh yeah, you could talk to Michael. I'm sure Michael can send you an email on that one. Yeah, Michael, Michael, send Mongolian Mindset an email about what you do. Oh, there you go. Go to Mind and Emotion as well.
Minding.
That's Mind and Emotion. Yeah, so I've been sort of doing some. I'm being sort of consulting with him just to sort of help take his theory to the next level. Mindemotion.com. Um, okay. Um, Mercer, been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And
On our channel one day, man. It would be
yeah, yeah, I'd love to come on. Absolutely would love to come on.
all right. That was awesome. I'll send you a message or something. It's actually
Right.
man.
We'll put a date in the diary. I look forward.
All right.
Um,
Anything?
all the best, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Take care now.
All right, brother. Take it easy, man.
Take it easy. Bye bye.